Welcome to the RAS Project, episode 99, a conversation about life, entrepreneurship, personal development, family tech, and marketing. My name is Ivan Temelkov, and I'm your host. And joining me this morning is my amazing sidekick, Courtney Turner. Good morning, Courtney. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. If this is your first time tuning into the podcast, here you will gather 100% real, raw, and unfiltered, life-changing advice to help you level up in every aspect of your life and business and help you reach your goals and dreams. Courtney, how was your Christmas? Did you have a good Christmas?
I did. Yeah. Wasn't like super eventful. I was super excited because there was a restaurant that was kind of rebelling against the ban, and they had opened up. I had a reservation. It's Mastro's. I'm sure you've heard of Mastro's.
Sure.
And so I was really excited. A friend of mine who's also here for the holiday was going to go with me. And I talked to one of my other friends about it, and she was super excited. And my other friend was like, wow, I can't believe they're open. And she wanted to go too. Her boyfriend called. It turns out that Newsom shut them down at the very last minute. So what happened here is that there was, we had a outdoor restaurant ban. They closed down, and then there was a court ruling, and the judge ruled that they had no merit for the outdoor. Sure. There was no scientific basis. There was absolutely no merit for this sanction. So they had agreed to lift the ban, but at the very last minute, Newsom decided to override it with a state ban. And I called up. So my other friend had her boyfriend call, and she texted me and she said, they're closed, they're not open. And so I called, and somebody was there, and he explained to me that at the very last minute they had to cancel 90 workers. I actually cried because
that is crazy.
Like, I can't imagine all 90 of them were Jewish. These people must have been just so excited to have work. And they were willing to work on Christmas Day. And Newsom comes along and says, yeah, no, we're shutting you down. And, they told me there's takeout, but it's a very expensive restaurant. And, by the time it's like 45 minutes away, by the time it gets to me, it's going to be,
sure.
So we didn't do that. But that was heartbreaking to me. Just to think about those people who were so excited to have work that they were willing to spend Christmas Day. I don't celebrate Christmas. Like I celebrate it, but it's not a holiday for me.
Sure.
So, it wouldn't have been the same. But for somebody who, does celebrate and is religious, I can't imagine, being willing to work on that day and being so excited to have work because you've been shut down for so long. And then to have some dictator basically come around and tell you at the very last minute too. But other than that, it was, I ended up ordering in from like the one place that was willing to deliver, and it was perfectly nice. I spent time with a friend of mine, and that was great. But other than that, it was, just a lot of like reading and writing and training.
Yeah. It's interesting. You were talking about your experience over Christmas because leading up to Christmas, I was reading some posts on LinkedIn, actually. And as you know, I'm a huge follower of psychology and personal development and mindset. And there were a few posts that I noticed that some people were talking about how they were making a different choice this year for Christmas, really. But, different, where they were really just focusing more on themselves. To help improve themselves, refocus, get clarity, use the time as opposed to, I feel like Christmas has been so scrutinized these days because, if you have kids like me and families, it's like, it's about, gatherings and toys and materialistic things. And I'm like, wait, did we forget what Christmas was really about? Like, Christmas is, if you're religious, obviously, so, Jesus's birthday, right? Christmas Day. And so, but most people, especially with kids, look forward to toys and things like that. And I'm like, oh my God, like, is society becoming so mediocre?
I don't know that I would say that it's society and that's a new thing. I mean, I'm not all that young, and even as, by heritage, we're Jewish, and
Sure.
my father really believed in celebrating Christmas. He believed it was an American holiday and that it was really important. And, it was part of stimulating the American economy and, a lot of things that America stands for. I mean, this country was founded on Judeo-Christian values. So
Right.
Christmas is a national holiday. And I don't know, as a kid, it was a really joyous thing to be able to decorate the tree and like wake up that morning and get presents and see what you're getting. And, I don't know that, I think when there's a 360 days a year, the focus is on material things. Like that's not necessarily values we want to inculcate, but I'm not sure that having one day of, if you're on the nice list and Santa rewards you, and I don't know. I mean, I honestly, I think it's something children really look forward to, and it's a day that kind of caters to them. And I don't think it's new that, they celebrate materialistic, and you don't have to make it all materialistic. I mean, from my experience, Christmas was a lot about like decorating the tree. All my Jewish friends would come over to decorate the tree.
Yeah.
And it's about like the festive spirit, the family gathering around and, baking treats and whatever, so it's not just the physical material things, but I think there is value in nice things, and for kids excited about getting the gift that they've been wanting all year. I don't know that that's such a terrible thing.
Yeah. And I actually want to continue that conversation in terms of the main topic that I wanted to discuss on today's episode. But first, just a couple of reminders that we are live streaming every Monday and Friday at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on LinkedIn Live, Facebook Live, YouTube, Twitch, let's see, Periscope, which is getting shut down, I heard, next year in March. So that's going to be Twitter. And then you can always catch the RAS Project Overdrive, which are pre-recorded episodes and more content by subscribing to the RAS Project on every single major podcasting platform. And after that, I also wanted to throw in some info around Courtney's podcast, the Courtney Turner Podcast, which is now up on Apple Podcasts. So make sure you go and subscribe to it. There's lots and lots of great content on there that you guys can check out as well. And so back to what you were saying, Courtney, yes, I agree, kids get excited, because when kids are young, they don't, their mindset is not that sophisticated. So, toys and things like that really excite them. I remember being a kid and just, getting excited over toys and stuff. But where I really wanted to go with this is, so, we're now past Christmas, right? Today's the 28th of December. We're 4 days away from the first day of the new year. And what happens in this last week? Well, a lot of people get jazzed up about New Year's resolutions, right? And talk about how I'm going to become a better person in 2021. 2020 has been such a bad year, which it was actually you who brought up 2020 clarity, right? Clear vision. But let's talk about this. If you thought that 2020 was a terrible year and you failed to invest in yourself, 2021 is not going to be any better for you. Right? Simply because you just haven't made the strides, you haven't taken action, and you haven't made choices that's going to help you improve, become a better person, become a better entrepreneur, improve your relationship, like all of these things. And I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions that people have this time of year, leading up to the new year, because they think that, the new year is going to change me.
Yeah.
And that is so false. I mean, that is so false, right? What are your thoughts on that? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. And I'm hearing a lot of that, especially with 2020. People are looking forward to 2020 being hindsight.
Right.
I understand that. I relate to a lot of that, but I don't know that, that means that 2021 is automatically going to, erase everything and be like this fresh start. The analogy I used, I think on the last time we talked, when I was saying how it's about clarity and clear vision, was of a room. So when you start to clean out your room, in the beginning, you make a big mess. Or at least that's what I do. And you need to, in order to see everything,
Right.
you have to pull everything out. And then even after you've started to clean things out and you decide, I don't need this anymore, and you make all these piles of things that you're, going to give away or get rid of, even then you still have a huge mess to organize and clean up. And I think that's the part that people haven't recognized, so even those people who have put work in 2020, even the people who have started to examine things and gain some clarity, they still have a lot of organizing and cleaning up to do in their lives and in themselves, because we always do. We're works in progress, so we always will. But I think a lot of people want to kind of sit back and think that there's just like this magic wand over 2021. And I don't know. I think that definitely we've got a lot of things to clean up. I know I do personally, and I think we certainly do as a country and as a world. So
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And a couple of things I wanted to touch upon, and this is really just from personal experience and what has happened in 2020. The year started off on a strong foot, as every year does, very optimistic, very enthusiastic about life, business, everything that was happening. And then, when this pandemic hit, like late March or I think it was April, I think a lot of people, and I know to some extent for me personally, my judgment and focus was being clouded, because suddenly I was becoming distracted by what's happening in the media, what people were talking about, family, friends, because as you know, the external can affect us. And it does as human beings. It affects us because it influences us. So, there was a lot of that was happening. And then I think the one thing that I did really well this year is that I was more self-aware than I ever have been, by retaining focus and retaining clarity and retaining commitment on what's important to me. And because, for example, I feel like for the last at least 6 months, in some extent on social media, I have seen, posts like, oh my God, 2020 was such a bad year and blah, 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 and this and this. And I'm like, let's reverse engineer this for a second. It's perception is reality. So if you, you perceive things in the negative way and you feel like everything is negative, right? Like, for example, I saw a post this morning that a friend that I actually know in real life, I haven't talked to her in about 10 years. Her mother actually passed away from COVID this morning. And so, but then I really got to thinking, I think that kind of methodology that like really creates an emotional impact, right? I mean, that's definitely detrimental, that's, so a loved one passing away. But the mindset behind that and why I'm exemplifying this is I think people get too wrapped into that. They allow, because let's face it, I mean, we'll have loved ones that pass. We'll have setbacks that will happen. There'll be a lot of things that will happen in life. And I know there's been things that have happened this year to me, especially over the last 2 months, even in business, that have been like setbacks, and my initial thought will be, okay, why don't you just recoup and, quit while you're ahead? That would have been the traditional me that would have done that. But the new me is like, no, there's no quitting. I mean, you need to keep going. You need to remain optimistic. You need to remain positive. You need to remain solution oriented and keep calm, collect your thoughts, be strategic. And when I started doing that, I mean, I know when news really broke out about COVID-19, like a lot of people were panicking. And I mean, this was like, April, May, June of this year. Now me was like, Ivan, remain focused. Just keep doing what you've been doing. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I think people need to remember going into 21 is that if you don't invest in yourself, if you don't find that clarity, if you don't retain so focused on your purpose and your goals, then of course you're going to allow all the external to influence you and derail you from your mission. And I mean, when I look at anyone that's been successful, and again, success can be a multitude of things, but, whether it was building a successful business or, having a happy relationship or kids or, buying the dream house or whatever it might be, they've been resilient in their pursuit of that. Like
Sure.
just every day getting up and just doing and doing and doing and doing and more doing, regardless of what's happening in the world. And you get, because consistency is a key factor in getting the things that you want. And so many people, I think in 2020, were like, oh, the pandemic, the elections, and this and this. I'm just like, you know what? Here's me. I'm just doing my own thing. That's probably the best advice that I think I would give to anyone going into 2021 is just that what is it that you really want? How bad do you want it? And how persistent can you remain to doing those things? That's really it, you
I
know?
I would. I think my approach is kind of somewhere in the middle. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely believe that consistency is really important for any kind of success. Certainly my background as an athlete and as a coach, like that's one of the things I talk about all the time, that movement teaches you. You have to be consistent. A lot
Right.
of people are looking for the quick fix and the short term, but it's really all about consistency. That in the end is going to pay off way more than, the high intensity for one day or 1 week. And that's true in life, in business, in relationships, so forth, so on. And so I think it is really important for people to be, to have clarity, to use that word again,
Yeah.
and to be clear on who they are and what's important to them and to stay focused. But I don't think that necessarily has to mean that you bury your head in the sand and ignore everything that's going on around you. I think
Yeah.
part of the reason we've gotten to the place we are today, as a country and as a world, really, is because a lot of people have been so unaware. And, I understand it. People want to go about their lives. And especially in this country, we value
Yeah.
freedom. That's, usually a first principle for most people. And so they want to be left alone. They want to go about, do their thing and focus on their goals and their families and their dreams. But there is I think, in order to be able to pursue those things, there is a sense of responsibility that one has to have. You need to be aware of the things around you. So the analogy that I would use is, if you have a house, right? You can, let's say you own a house, but you're so focused on, a project within that house, right?
Right.
And your goal is to get that done. I don't know what it is. We can say, let's just, for the sake of something.
Modeling.
What?
Remodeling, maybe.
No. Like something more like, a specific, like I'm building a table, and
Okay.
I'm building it from scratch. I'm really focused. I'm hyper focused on that. And
Mm-hmm.
meanwhile, the house is falling apart. I'm starting to get leaks in the ceiling. I'm starting to get cracks in, all the corners, and it's really falling apart. But meanwhile, I'm super focused on building this table. I've got to get this table done. So every day I'm going to work on this table. And I have my blinders on because my focus is just this table. And I have no idea that the rest of the house is caving in on me. The plumbing is going and the roof is falling, and, there are cracks in the corners of the bases, So
Yeah.
then what good is that table if the whole house falls apart? So I think that's kind of the analogy, is that yes, you still want to, you're not going to be like, oh, well, forget the table, let me just go, and you had a goal of fixing this table,
Sure.
building this table rather. So, you don't just forget about the whole house. So don't forget about the table to go focus on the house. But, what good is that table going to be if you're so blindfolded that you don't recognize that the house is falling apart? Where you put the table. So I think that's kind of the analogy. And I think people need to have an awareness of that, because, another analogy, and I'll make this one quick, but it's just, what if you're so focused on your business that you ignore your relationships, right? And then that they take a real toll. So I think
Right.
things that are happening around us are important, and what we shouldn't sacrifice one for the other. I think it's really important for us to have an awareness, and that doesn't mean you don't have priorities. It doesn't mean that you don't stay focused on your goals. But if certain things are falling apart, those goals are not going to mean anything. You're not going to be able to achieve them.
Yeah. One really good point that you brought up that I want to elaborate upon, because I didn't mention is just that, and by the way, that was a great example of, being hyper focused on your goals, but at the same time, I think as human beings, we have the responsibility also to contribute to the world and society, because it is our duty as human beings to be able to do good and contribute good and try to make it right where we see that there's wrong. That's just, it should be in our human nature. So I agree with you, is just that, like you were giving the example of building the table, it's important to be so focused on your goals and your priorities and what's important to you, but at the same time, do not ignore the external. I think with that also comes how much of the external can we really control, because that's one thing that I've thought about in 2020, with everything that's been going on, is like, okay, how much can I control and what can't I control? Because I think one of the biggest misconceptions with people, and going into 2021, I would advise anyone to think about this too, is that focus on what you can control, but don't also exclude what you can't control, because what you can't control doesn't mean that you cannot influence.
Exactly.
You know, and so that was a really good message that you shared, because I think for me personally is just that I've really hyper focused on what's important to me, like what do I want to accomplish, what I want to do. I've just become vigilant in that. But at the same time, like I look at the world and I'm like, how can I contribute to like making the world a better place? Like what can I do to share more good, whether it's the show, to have some clarity, whether it's just talking to people, taking on my first coaching client, which I realized that sometimes some people just want to have that one person that wants to listen to them. That's such a huge.
Why a lot of people go to therapy.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, it's really good to hire somebody to sit there and listen to them.
Just completely non-judgmental. And that's something that I'm also learning too, is just that, with my coaching client, for example, it's like, sometimes people just find closure in knowing that there's someone there that they can depend on, someone that they can trust, someone that they can turn to for advice. And mind you, is that I give advice and I tell people that, like, you take it or leave it. It's totally up to you. I'm not enforcing it. I'm just telling you what, and this comes from a place of love. This comes from a place of righteousness. And this comes from a place of, just doing right. But it's so interesting. And that's my way. And I think as I get older too, I'm starting to realize, especially going into this new year, like, what can I do to contribute more? What can I do to influence? Because yes, I love talking to people. I love having conversations. I think communication is a huge, huge thing, especially going into this new year, that if those of you watching and listening, if you haven't embraced more succinct communication, whether it's in your personal life or in your relationship or in your business with your clients, absolutely embrace that, because communication solves problems. It puts everything on the table and helps you say, okay, here's what we're dealing with. Here's our scenario. Here's our status quo. What can we do with what we've got? So what's your thoughts on communication? Because I know that there's a huge psychological component behind that. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, communication is a really broad topic. So I have a lot of thoughts on it, but I think communication is really important, and I think it's actually something that is undervalued, but also utilized would be the word. I think a lot of people aren't very careful about their words. And Jordan Peterson, one of his 12 rules for life is about picking your words, and it really having clarity in your words and being precise with them. And I think that is something that is really important when is to have intention and clarity behind your words. Clarity seems to be my word of the day, by the way. So I'll just keep using it. I feel like a broken record. But yeah, I do think that there's a lot of importance, and a lot of people talk just to hear themselves talk. A lot of people avoid conversations that are really important to be had, and they're not talking for the purpose of connecting. Communication is really, it's about connecting, and there is in any relationship, the communication is super important. You don't really have a relationship if you don't have communication. For people to be heard, validated, and understood, there needs to be very clear and intentional communication. And that goes for whether it be personal relationships, professional relationships, or even, in business, when you have a target audience, you communicate, and you need to communicate with precision in order to reach that audience. So yeah, I think it's something that, especially today, is it's a lost art, and I think a lot of that has to do with technology. I was on a group podcast yesterday, actually, and we were talking a lot about technology and kind of the blessings and curses and what the future of the world was going to be with it. And somebody brought up, and I loved his optimism. It was really endearing. But he's like, "Well, technology is going to expand our brains and make us so much smarter." And I said, at the upper echelon of people who are using very complex, intricate technological means and devices and their utilization of it, sure. But for the most part, we can see it just with basic arithmetic. Most people don't know how to do it anymore because of calculators. I grew up where if somebody literally just mentioned their phone number, I memorized it. Now I think I have like 10 numbers in my head, because every other number, I never even had the opportunity to even look at it because it went directly into my phone. I never saw it once. I don't memorize these people's phone numbers. To some extent, maybe addresses if I've driven there, but our memories are so different. I don't want to say better or worse, because there's different facets that we use now versus when we had different technology or less technology. But I think that it is a lost art because of the technology. So people spend less time in real time communicating with other human beings. So therefore, their means of communicating is not as eloquent or elaborate or articulate. In text, most of us don't even use punctuation in text anymore. We're not that careful because we're doing it. We're multitasking and we're just spewing something. And I think also just because of the limited attention spans of people, we're hyper reactionary. And so that affects communication as well. So I could go on and on, but no, thoughts.
Those were all excellent points, and there were a few things that I was trying to make mental notes of that you mentioned that I would really advise anyone, especially into 2021, to really pay stronger attention to. The first one is, you said, speak and communicate with intention. Don't just speak because you just want to be heard. I mean, sure, you want to be heard, but have a specific intent.
Or just because you want to hear yourself speak.
Right.
It's different. You want to be heard, but understand how you want to be heard.
Right.
What is your intent in communicating? What is the purpose behind it?
Yes.
Not just to hear yourself speak.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. The other thing that you said that's really important is have the hard conversations. Because I think too many people, whether it's, in friendships, relationships, business, all of the above, you have to have hard conversations. Because the hard conversations are actually the ones that are most worthwhile. A prime example is, in my marriage, even, it's, I know sometimes I don't want to have hard conversations, but I know that if I don't have those hard conversations, that they're going to drag on, and then they just become a huge problem. And I've seen that, happen in certain situations. And I've realized that, okay, I'll just do my part. And that's what I would advise anyone. Do your part. Just be the one to initiate that hard conversation, because maybe it's heavy on your heart. Initiate that conversation, because what you'll find out is when you initiate those hard conversations, that you're suddenly in the midst of finding a solution because you brought it out to the open. And I think that's, speaking of communication, because I personally see that as such a huge component in anything really that you do, that's probably one of the biggest things, because, I've done that this year. I've had a lot of hard conversations with clients. I've had a lot of hard conversations with people in my life. I know that there's been hard conversations that have ruined certain relationships because we couldn't find a middle ground. But
Yeah,
what I realized is just
I've
that,
experienced that.
yeah, would you rather try to resolve a problem by communicating through it and trying to find a solution than to drag it on and becomes a bigger problem?
Well, and actually, there's something else I want to address, and it's something you
Mhm.
and I actually talked about. I don't know that we talked about it on air, but
Yeah,
we had talked about this. But I think actually having those difficult conversations, because you said some of them you weren't able to resolve because you just
yeah,
couldn't find middle ground, and I think there's a value in that as well, because I think it's really important to know your own values and know what you're willing to negotiate on and what you're not, to know your own priorities, and that the people, not that everybody has to agree with you, but
right,
that the people who will respect what you value and your opinions, and they, you can, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, agree to disagree, if you will. um that
right.
that's but but the people who won't, to recognize that those aren't your people, and there's value in that too. And there's that saying, like, people are like, there are people come into your life for a season, a reason, or a lifetime. A reason, a season, a lifetime, and there is some truth to that. And I for one have a really hard time with that concept, because
Yeah.
I'm a very loyal person, and I'm somebody who really values it. I don't necessarily let people in that easily or that quickly, and when I do, I hold those relationships very, very dear. I
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
leave my life on the line for people who I have let into my life. Like, I've chosen to let them in, and they're people, I've done that because I really value them. And so when, if that relationship, if there is a rift, then it feels like a tremendous loss and betrayal to me. So, and sometimes
Yeah.
it's not for any reason other, just, people separate, they go different ways. But I think it is important to recognize that when you're willing to stand up for something that is important to you, you pick your battles. I don't think it's worth being contentious with everybody and everyone at all
Yeah.
times. But
Yeah.
there are times where you have difficult conversations about things that are really important to you. And even if you don't come to common ground with that person, for that person to recognize, like, I respect the fact that you have, strong convictions, and you're willing to stand by them, and that
Mhm.
you have integrity. You're not willing to waver just to be liked. I don't agree with you. To
Sure.
say that I don't agree with you,
Sure.
that's perfectly fine. And I don't see that we're going to come to a place where we agree, but I still respect you as a person. And then for somebody who's not willing to do that, then you recognize, okay, this wasn't somebody I need in my life. And
You
and
know,
when you prolong having that conversation,
right.
you're just prolonging having somebody in your life who doesn't really have your back.
I had a difficult conversation. I want to allude to what you just said because this is huge. So, from a communication standpoint, and I brought that up because this is something that in life and business, entrepreneurship is essential. But I wanted to allude to what you just said because I had a difficult conversation with a family member recently, and it turned into just finger pointing basically towards me. It was like this and this and this and this. It was just like finger pointing, right?
Yeah.
And I was sitting here, and like one side of me was like, I was feeling the guilt trip. I was like, should I feel guilty about all of this? Am I really guilty of all of this? And then I kind of reflected back. I'm like, no, it's coming from a place of jealousy and hatred almost. And because there was no justification behind it. But
Yeah.
that's when I realized what you just said is just that to be the bigger person, to agree to disagree, sometimes you just go silent, really, because when you think about it, it could turn into a bickering contest. And sure, there's some merit to, having a conversation only if it's constructive. That's
Yeah.
how I see it, if it's
Yeah.
constructive.
Sure.
But it's okay to agree to disagree,
Absolutely.
right? Because there's beauty in that too. Because when you agree to disagree, is this that one person has a point of view and you have your own point of view that stands behind your convictions, morals, and values, right? And I think that's the beauty about not only the United States but the beauty about humanity as a whole. Because think about it, is that if you were
Well,
all the
I would
same,
say the United States, because a lot of places you don't have that luxury.
right?
You really
You
don't
don't.
have that luxury. Your life is on the line if you speak your mind. And, that's
Yes.
tragic. I think that goes against everything that human beings stand for. So, and everything that's
Yep.
beautiful about humanity. But,
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, because I'm someone who grew up in the former communist country, and I remember that you spoke your mind, you get arrested and thrown in jail. That was literally it. Because you disagreed with the totalitarian regime, right? And so, but also, that really goes to just really being a human being, also, because when you think about it, is okay, like living under a totalitarian regime, like I don't want anybody to ever experience that, because for one, I was young, but also I remember a lot of that. But the beauty about freedom of speech and standing up for what you believe in is not only within the United States, but also as a human being. Because if you think about it, if we all had the same perception, if we all had the same point of view on everything, wouldn't that be kind of a dull world? Because we'd all
would it be a dull? It would be very stagnant. We wouldn't have, conflict is where creativity is born. It's a lot of times. It's not the only
right,
time.
right,
You find creative solutions when you're up against something difficult. Or you're up against resistance. And
yep,
I want to speak to your point about it. It's really about humanity, and it absolutely is, because the one thing that makes human beings so different from other creatures is that we have free will. Most
right,
animals or most creatures are driven by instincts or just biological function. And that's
right.
not true for human beings. We have consciousness and we have free will. And I think it's what is so remarkable and it's so special, really, about humanity, is that we do
Yep,
have free will. And with free will comes great responsibility. And so when you're talking
yeah.
about communication, I think it is really important to be careful with our choices and intentional with our choices. And that includes how you communicate, with whom you communicate, and what you communicate.
You said, and this is another advice that I would give to anyone in 2021, is you said free will. So, being Christmas this past week, we ended up watching the movie Son of God. And my son is, really big into Jesus Christ right now, and he really recognizes all of that. And it's actually fascinating because, him being 4 years old, I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, but we were watching Son of God, and I remember when you said free will, right? And how huge of a part, how huge of an advantage that is to us as human beings. And I think whether you're an entrepreneur or just, in your personal life, like you need to recognize that you do have one of the biggest ultimate powers, which is free will. And so many people I don't think recognize that, let alone exercise it,
Yeah.
because they're afraid of the repercussions that might come with that.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of why people choose to play victim, because they don't want to take responsibility for their actions. So it's
Yeah,
much easier to say, "Oh, I have no choice. I'm locked into this." But the truth of the matter is, people always
mm,
have a choice. They may not like the choices they have. We don't always have the best choice,
right,
or
right.
our dream choices available, but we always have choice. So
Absolutely. And that's probably where I want to leave it too, because choice is important, free will is important. And just to kind of summarize things on this episode, really, because again, and this is actually the last episode of 2020, come to think of it. Wow, I can't believe it. I mean, another year. And but the advice that I want to leave anyone watching and listening is this: that be vigilant in your pursuit, be resilient, exercise your free will, stand up for what you believe in, even if the rest of the world might look at you as an anomaly, because that's the beauty, as you said, finding creativity in difficult times, when it kind of feels like the rest of the world is up against you. Because sure, 2021 is a new year, but if you don't recognize and really hold close your morals and values and convictions, you're never going to find fulfillment and happiness, no matter what you do. And that's really the key message that I wanted to share on this episode. And again, I want to thank you for the amazing conversation. You always bring, an amazing perspective, a psychological perspective that I think is so key. And personally, I'm a huge fan of that because I've been going back to this quote, from Tony Robbins that, business is 90% psychology and 10% execution. I feel like, living a prosperous life is very much so also that if you have the right psychology and mindset that you can accomplish anything really.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you so much for the conversation. And we should be back Friday. So that'll be the 1st of 2021, January 1st. That's crazy. That's crazy.
So great.
And did you have anything else you wanted to add, Courtney?
Yeah, so I love that quote by Tony Robbins, and it's interesting because it made me think about how, as a little kid, I think I was like 6 or 7 years old, my dad asked me to define success, and and I remember I told him that I think success is personal fulfillment, and he was very surprised. He agreed with me. But most people would say like success is having a certain amount of money or, accomplishing like a certain goal or having a certain house or, and he said, but what if what if those things aren't important to that person? So then they wouldn't feel successful if they had those things, but they didn't have something else that they wanted.
Right.
I've always remembered that conversation because in hindsight, I think it was an interesting thing to ask such a young child.
Yeah.
And I remember it really well. I mean, we were sitting at a dinner table and my dad asked me to define success. And we get there, but so it really it speaks to your point and to that quote because a lot of it is about mindset and it is about personal fulfillment. We all have, there's so much as human beings that we all share, but there's also the things that make each of us really unique, and the things that we want are not necessarily all the same. The things that are important to us are not necessarily all the same. And even when they're similar, there are nuanced differences. And those all come into play because of our unique psychological makeup, our unique personal experiences, our unique biological makeup, and just the fate of our lives. So, yeah.
No, that is beautiful. Personal fulfillment. I might have to make a caption out of that or a post because you're right. You're right. I think it's about personal fulfillment. I want to thank everybody. This year has been an evolving year. I want to thank everybody for watching and listening. Courtney, I want to thank you as always, bringing a wealth of knowledge and perspective. That's one of the beauties about, I think, this show. And, it's been an interesting year for sure. I will say that. So
I met you this year, and we started this year, and that's been such a year. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think the best is yet to come. Like you said, with building relationships and going into a new year, is just that the more you stick to something and the more you build that consistency, the more you'll reap the rewards in the end. And that is so key in really anything you do, whether it's fitness, nutrition, relationship, personal life, business, like consistency to the T, like showing up every single day and going after what's important to you. That's what I think is going to make 2021 your best year. Just be consistent.
Yeah. Be consistent.
Message.
Be clear in your priorities.
Exactly. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for an amazing 2020. Courtney, as always, absolute pleasure. And we'll see you in 2021.
All right.
Bye-bye, everybody.